everyone, and welcome back to Know All for GCSE. So today we're going to be now focusing on English language, English literature, and maths revision. So let's get started. From 9 to 10, we're going to be doing English language revision, and in this session we'll be doing Paper 1, Section A. We'll be looking at the assessment objectives, how to answer each question, and then we're going to be looking at practice questions, not necessarily from past papers because I know there are very few, so you probably may have done them already, but from other sources so that we can practice our skills that we learned today. So, as we said, let's get started. Okay. So in GCSE English language, there are, just like English, assessment objectives. Now, in Paper 1, Section A, test on 4 different assessment objectives. So there's AO1, AO2, AO3, and AO4. AO1 is being able to identify and interpret both explicit and implicit information. So explicit is obvious information that's directly suggested, and implicit information is information in which you have to read between the lines. AO2 is being able to comment on how the writer uses language and structure to achieve effects and influence readers. So AO2 is all about methods of language and structure. Now, AO3 is about being able to compare writers' ideas and compare writers' perspectives. And AO4 is being able to evaluate texts critically. Now, these AO4s are all found within Paper 1, Section A. So it's important that you spend your time looking and reminding yourself of what these AOs are for, because this is what you'll be given marks for, each of these 4 AOs. So, for Section A is called the reading section. This is what we will be focusing on today. Section A is a reading, and you're advised to spend 45 minutes on Section A reading and 45 minutes on Section B writing. So 45 minutes. Sorry, I'm just checking something. So yeah, 45 minutes per one, and there are 4 questions within Section A's reading, which are 40 marks in total. So question 1, question 2, question 3, and question 4. Question 1 is worth 4 marks. Question 2 is worth 8 marks. Question 3 is also 8 marks. And question 4 is 20 marks. So if we have 45 minutes and there's a total of 40 marks, then roughly there is 1 mark per minute. And we're advised to spend 15 minutes reading and planning. But 15 minutes is way too long just reading and planning. So 15 minutes is advised, but I would suggest instead of 15 minutes, doing something more like maximum 10 max. Okay. So let's look at what question would look like. So you're going to be given a fiction extract to read from the 20th to the 21st century. So fiction extract. Now, paper 1 is the paper in which you're only given 1 text. In English language paper 2, you're given 2 texts. So fiction extract from the 20th to the 21st century. As I said, no more than 10 minutes reading time. I think what you should do is step 1, read the questions, because this is what I did. So read the questions first. Then see which ones you can answer by reading the beginning of the source. Because normally the first question will be something like this. First part of the source, from lines this to this. List 4 things about whatever. So I'm going to go through a practice question with you, and I'll show you what that will look like. So let me present another screen. So this is the question that we'll be looking at. This is the extract that we'll be looking at. And you won't find it in any past papers because this was made by a school. So we're given information at the top, then we're given the extract, which is 3 paragraphs long, and then we have the questions on this side. So first of all, as we said, the first thing you need to do is read the question. So the question, read again lines 1 to 10 of the source. List 4 things from this part of the source about the jack. So we've got the line segments that we're reading from, and the really helpful thing about this is by reading the first one, you already know that from lines 1 to 10, you're reading them, you're already going to be answering a question. So let's read 1 to 10. So this is line 10. And let's read. Jack was bent double. He was down like a sprinter, his nose only a few inches from the humid earth. The tree trunks and the creepers that festooned them lost themselves in a green dusk 30 feet above him, and all about was the undergrowth. There was only the faintest indication of a trail here, a cracked twig, and what might be the impression of one side of a hoof. He lowered his chin and stared at the traces, as though he would force them to speak to him. Then, dog-like, uncomfortably on all fours, yet unheeding his discomfort, he stole 5 yards and stopped. Here was loop of creeper, with a tendril pendant from a node. The tendril was polished on the underside. Pigs, passing through the loop, brushed it with their bristly hide. Jack crouched with his face a few inches away from this clue, then stared forward into the semi-darkness of the undergrowth, his sandy hair considerably longer than it had ever been when they dropped in. It was light. So they're the 10 lines that we've been asked to read about. So we've been asked to list 4 things about Jack. So let's see. We can say all you have to do is basically underline key bits that you see about him. So we see that his sandy hair. So you can say he has sandy hair. He was on all fours. That's another thing. So you can say facts here. So you just need to find 4 facts about whatever you're being asked about, and you lay it down and you put it into the question. So this is a harder text. You would not normally get this, but you can just say he stole forward 5 yards and stopped, and he was down like a sprinter. You can say these 4 things. Okay. So that's question 1 done. That's why it's always important to read the question first, because then you can list the 4 things. Now, question 2 and question 3 are the 8 mark. So question 2 is always going to look like this. Look in detail at this extract from lines something to something of this source. How does the writer use language to describe whatever? So in this case, we asked, how does the writer language to describe include the writer's choice of words and language features and technique and sentence forms. So typically, the extract is no longer than 8 lines, and it's reaching the limit. And in question 1, we were assessed on AO1, which is identifying explicit, so obvious information from the text. Now, in question 2, we're being assessed on AO2, which, if you remember, is methods, so language methods, structural methods. So we're being asked what methods, in this case specifically language, are used to describe Jack. So you're roughly expected to write 2 to 3 paragraphs of language analysis. I recommend spending 10 minutes on this question, and you can write about the effects that the writer was trying to create and why he chose them. So you must talk about the effects on the reader, but you don't want to make it sound too analytical. So you don't want to make it, so you can list like the writer used a metaphor, for example, but you don't want to try and predict what the effect was that the writer was trying to create, because that is literature. Here we're just trying to show how has language been used to present Jack. So you can which shows blah blah blah. We don't want to interpret things, we just want to state whatever is being used. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes to answer this question. So look in detail at this extract from lines 8 to 16. How does the writer use language to present Jack? So I'm going to show you. So we're being asked from here to up to here. And I want you to answer this question. How does a writer use language to describe Jack? I'm going to give you 10 minutes. So off you go. Okay, so it has now been 10 minutes, so hopefully you've written quite a lot about this. So, marker. And what an 8 marker would normally be marked on is how well it has responded to AO2. So, how well you've explained, commented on, and analysed how writing language to achieve this effect of describing describing the character and influencing readers. So, some things you could have said, which I definitely mentioned. Naked and he closed his eyes. So I say the minimalistic use of language communicates a very simple and unrefined nature of, only mention on my third point, the eyes. So the bright blue eyes that seemed bolting and nearly mad. So the simile of the eyes and the personification of the eyes characterizes Jack as a characteristic hunger can be seen through his eyes. So I can show you my response. Oh, there seems to be some issues with the connection, but hopefully you can still see this. So this is my response. I only spent 5 minutes doing this because I was trying to fix some other stream issues. So this can always be improved, and normally the paragraphs should be the same, which is here, but we've done what AO2 is asking for. So we needed to comment on how writers use language. So let's comment here. So here we talked about the contrasting adjectives, we talked about the declarative tone, and we talked about the simile. We also talked about alliteration. Feel free to put more than 3 language points. If you spot more than 3, then put more than 3 because that's increasing your chances of getting higher grades. And in lighter, which is also part of AO2. And evidence is also present here. However, what I think is missing from this response is the evaluative language and being able to comment, because we definitely missed a bit of commenting on the last 2 paragraphs and what we could have said about the character. I can read the response out. So I said, the writer employs contrasting adjectives to characterize J and lighter, suggesting of bright and sun, whereas his bare back described to be a mass of dark freckles. This figurative language presents a sharp contrast between light and dark to highlight the tanned nature of Jack. The alliteration of bare back has this protruding sense of bluntness and suggests the almost animalistic nature of the character. The writer also uses declarative tone in his language to communicate the very simple and unrefined nature of Jack. It's conveyed as naked. Jack is conveyed as naked. Lack of refinement and often mask away flesh is gone here, paralleling the sense of exposure that the character brings. Through the writer's simile of Jack's eyes as almost bolting and nearly mad, the reader can infer this sense of rage and savageness in his character, as though the animalistic hunger is visible in his very eyes. So this is almost a skeleton of an answer that you could say. This is sort of what you meant of the first paragraph for all 3 paragraphs can be and how it can be answered. Let's now look at question 3, which is also another 8 marker, but it's requiring different things. So question 3 is always going to look something like this. You now need to think about the whole of the source. The text is from the opening of a chapter, or the text is from wherever. How has the writer structured the text to interest you? How has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? Is going to be the exact same for a question 3 in paper 1. How is how a text begins, develops, and ends. So you need to think about how, where, and why the writer has introduced things such as setting, narrator, character, atmosphere, events, and you're expected to write 2 to 3 paragraphs. So what I would say is the best way to do this is to read the text chronologically, because remember, even at this point, we haven't even read the entire text. So I would suggest reading the text as a whole, and then picking out structural features chronologically in order, so from the beginning to the end, and then write this paragraph being the middle, being second paragraph being the middle, third paragraph being the end. So the first paragraph can be the middle later on, and then the second is the middle comparing it to something later on, and the third is at the end and how it's developed. So it's up to you. I would always suggest the chronological approach for question 3. So let's go back to the extract. And we've read up to line 16. So what I would suggest from this point on is read the rest of the source, and then using like a different highlighter, start finding some structural techniques and compare it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the rest of the extract out loud with you, and then I'll set you a 15-minute timer or a 10-minute timer to answer this. Just checking if there's any issues. Okay, hopefully there's not. Okay, sorry. So, he passed his tongue across dry lips and scanned the uncommunicative forest. Then again he stole forward and cast this way and that over the ground. The silence of the forest was more oppressive than the heat, and at this hour of the day there was not even the whine of insects. Only when Jack himself roused a gaudy bird from a primitive nest of sticks was the silence shattered, and echoes set, ringing by a harsh cry that seemed to come out of the abyss of ages. Jack himself shrank at this cry with a hiss of indrawn breath, and for a minute became less a hunter than a furtive thing, ape-like among the tangle of trees. Then the trail, the frustration, claimed him again, and he searched the ground avidly. By the trunk of a vast tree that grew pale flowers on its grey bark, he checked, closed his eyes, and once more drew in the warm air. And this time his breath came short. There was even a passing pallor in his face, and then the surge of blood again. He passed like a shadow under the darkness of the tree, and crouched, looking down at the trodden ground at his feet. The droppings were warm. They lay piled among turned earth, steamed a little. Jack lifted his head and stared at the inscrutable masses of creeper that lay across the trail. Then he raised his spear and sneaked forward. Beyond this creeper, the trail joined a pig run that, as Jack rose to his full height, he heard something move on it. He swung back his right arm and hurled the spear with all his strength. From the pig run came the quick, hard patter of hoofs, a consonant sound, seductive, maddening, the promise of meat. He rushed out of the undergrowth, snatched up his spear. The patterning of pigs' trotters died away in the distance. Jack stood there, streaming with sweat, streaked with brown earth, stained by the vicissitudes of a day's hunting. Swearing, he turned off the trail and pushed his way through until the forest opened a little, and instead of bold trunks supporting a dark roof, there were light grey trunks and crowns of feathery palm. Beyond these was the glitter of the sea, and he could hear voices. Ralph was standing by a contraption of palm trunks and leaves, a rude shelter that faced the lagoon and seemed very near to falling down. He did not notice when Jack spoke. Okay, so we have now read the rest of the extract. What we are now expected to do is answer the question. So we need to find quotes and describe and comment on how structure has changed throughout the 3 paragraphs. It's really nice here because we have 3 separate paragraphs, so we can easily comment on them. A 12-minute timer for you to write as much as you can. Firstly, trying to pinpoint structure devices, and then write a full response. So I'm going to start the 12-minute timer, and feel free to begin now. Okay, everyone, I'm going to stop you there. I understand you may not be finished yet, but I just want to move on so that we can at least get some time for the 20 marker, which is very important, of course. So just wanted to show you a quick plan of what you could have discussed in this question. What kind of things you could have picked up in the structural formation. Of course, you could have picked up more than what I've listed here, but hopefully it's at least some of the things you may have put that are similar. So I said that in the beginning, there are lengthy, long-winded sentences, almost mimicking the long entangling trees. There's a very slow pace, and there's a lot of excessive vocabulary used. There's colons and punctuation, which are used to introduce the hints in which the main character slowly collects in order to speed up the intensity. So it emphasizes the importance of these small notices, and it can also, again, parallel the ever-growing intensity. Now, in the middle, there's a repetition of breath quite a lot, and breathing, and the idea that the main character is pacing around, again, mimics how the intensity is increasing. As the character attempts to slow the breath, he also attempts to claim back control of the forest. Through the repetition of breath, we get this sense of lack of control and how the character aims to try and control the intensity that is slowly building. And then in the end, triplet is used. Initially it's used, which highlights the depth of the discovery and happiness, and then triplet is used with sibilants to convey the slow return back from the mixed victory. So there's contrast between the two uses of triplet, and you could have mentioned that. And then there's also complex sentences of multiple consecutive clauses, which you might also have referred to as lists, and this shows the rapid and quick pauses, a sense of the dramatic pauses, and like how intense the situation is. And then finally, the triplet, as you said, with the sibilants, conveys almost the bitterness through the repetitive use of this, the harsh sounding syllables, and the regret and animosity towards this animal that he feels. So hopefully you learned a bit about question 3, and if you missed some of the points, that's okay. If you struggled to find structural points, maybe just go over what you understand as structural points. So you could have talked about different types of sentences. You could have talked about repetition. You could have talked about tone and things like that. We're now going to move on to question 4, which is the 20 marker. This is the main marker in the paper 1 section A. And it tends to go like this. Focus this part of your answer on the second part of the story where, and then you get a statement. So in this case, the statement is, a student having read this section of the text said, this part of the text describing how Jack is behaving shows how he is almost like an animal hunting prey. It reminds me of the first line. To what extent do you agree? So in your response, you can consider your own impressions, evaluate how the writer creates a mood, and support your effect. So this is AO4. This is you evaluating texts critically, and this is you supporting them with appropriate textual references. So you can begin with an opinion. That's what I would suggest. Begin with an opinion, but you need to try and also show variation in your opinions and perspectives. Obviously, you need to show for and against, and then also try and be more stronger in your argument than in that way. And I would suggest 4 to 5 paragraphs analysing language, analysing structure, have a small conclusion, talk about the extent to which you agree and the extent to which you disagree. So since we've been working on this text this whole session, I think we should definitely end on it. And what I'm going to do is, I think, hopefully split the screen so you'll be able to see the text and you'll be able to see me writing. Okay. believe there are some internet issues. What I would require you to do is just to answer this question whilst I try and figure that out. Thank you very much. Hi everyone. I'm hoping that this voice is now working. I just thought that since we have roughly 8 minutes left, I'll just talk you through me trying to answer this question and just planning and what we could say, which proves the statement is right. And just remind yourself of the statement that the student believes that the way Jack is behaving is like he's almost like an animal hunting prey. So we're looking for animalistic vocabulary, as well as things that prove against this idea. Okay. So I've already started highlighting some of the verbs, such as stared, sneaked forward, swung back his arm, and hurled. So these are all quite active verbs, so you could all highlight how there's a lot of action occurring and how he's constantly moving. So the active verbs. You could also perhaps discuss what else? So the promise of meat. the way the narrator introduces food, so as opposed to what the narrator could have said, food, the narrator chose to say meat, which is definitely more harsher, has animalistic connotations, and through this refusal of euphemistic vocabulary, we see that the writer is therefore seeking perhaps this animalistic idea of being savage and things like that. It's also important to just zoom in to the question as well, because the question is saying that he is animalistic, or like an animal hunting. This is what the statement says. So it's important for us to recognize, what do we understand from this statement? There's a bit of issues going on. Okay. So yeah, what do we understand by this idea of being an animal hunting? So animal has connotations of being savage, emotion, and intelligence. This could be viewed as an insult. We also have words such as primitive, hunting sounds like this idea of being desperate. This idea of survival. So when answering a question, especially question 4, I think one of the first things you need to do is definitely highlight, what do you understand by what the statement is saying, and really split it up, because we've got this idea of an animal being primitive and being savage and rage, and hunting being desperate and survival. So once we figure out what the statement is suggesting, then it's much easier to find out what we're looking for. So that is English language part 1 section. So part A of section 1. We've gone through and answered some questions, and we've also gone through how to answer it. So I will link this document down below because there are many practices. We will be doing more practice for English language section A next week as well. So if you missed this, or if you want to regurgitate, then we'll be doing some more practice then as well. But for now, we're now going to move on to English literature. So in this English literature session, we are now going to be looking at Anne in Spectacles. But I'll start doing Anne in Spectacles in 3 minutes, because I know some people wanted to wait for me to do it at 10 o'clock. So I'll return to you at 10 o'clock for Anne in Spectacles. Have a 2-minute break. Okay, everyone. We're now going to be moving on to an inspector calls. So, I know a lot of you out there do an inspector calls, which is why I've chosen to do this. Within this session, we're going to be going through exams, doing some plans, and then we'll be finishing it off doing a response. If you want to do quotes revision or things like that, perhaps before the session start, then you can do quotes revision, because in these sessions we're going to be doing practice, because practice is the best way to improve your English. So let's begin. So I found this document which has quite a lot of really useful and inspector calls questions. I'm going to share the link now in the chat so you can have access to it as well. In case you wanted to do your own annotations on them, it might be a lot easier. So let's first of all focus on the format of what the AQA and inspector calls question is going to look like. So this is going to be section A. So when you're looking for uninspected calls, it will always be section A, and it'll go under the modern prose or drama section. And you're going to get a choice. Uninspected calls is always a choice question. So normally it tends to be either a character or a theme. So the character question will be something like, how important is the character of Eric in determining Priestley's ideas? And then the theme will be something like, how successful is the idea of whatever theme it is, in this case, collective responsibility, explored in the play? Now, in terms of which one you should choose, I will always say, do not be so limiting, do not stick to always one. I think you will always be better off at one than the other, depending on how you revised and what you revised. So choose the one that you feel you will be better at. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare for each of the questions. So, and remember that with an inspector calls, you do not get an extract. So you just have to revise all of the knowledge from your head and use all of the quotes from your head. There's no extract in this case. Okay. So let's begin on the character question. How important is the character of Eric in determining Priestley's ideas? So here we've got almost a two-way question here, because we're not only seeing Eric as a character, but we're also being asked, how important is he in demonstrating Priestley's ideas? So we are almost being asked, what are Priestley's ideas? Because we have to definitely explore that. What is Priestley's purpose in this play? So let's explore that. So Priestley, what is Priestley's aim in Uninspected Calls? What is Priestley's aim? What is his role? What is his purpose? And what does he try to communicate? Well, there are many roles that he tries to communicate. The first role is that he tries to expose how the undercurrents of 1912 dictated many of the ways that the 20th century evolved. What I mean by that is how many of the opinions and belief systems and flaws in the 1912, such as the very discerning class system, caused many of the ways in which the 20th century happened, such as war. So Priestley's basically pointing blame to the 1912 society for the reasoning of how the 20th century is today. Now, Priestley also aims to address and expose how the society led to World War, how it led to the Titanic sinking. He's almost pointing blame at them. But why would the audience be so familiar with 1912? Because remember, the audience was 1945. So why would the 1945 audience even care or be familiar with the 1912? Well, the 1945 audience had voted out Churchill, the so-called war hero, which ushered in the first ever long-term Labour government. So this is that connection between 1912 and 1945. Just answering your question, Destiny, it's for English, but we're just talking about an inspector calls. So, sorry about that. Yes, so we're talking about how the 1945 audience links to the 1912, like why are they so interested in what Priestley has to say about 1912? And the reason is because they voted out Churchill and brought in the first ever Labour government. This then meant that they had recently experienced a shift towards, instead of focusing on the rich, now focusing on the poor. Therefore, everything that Priestley describes in the play is very exposed and obvious, such as how the rich treated the poor and things like that. So that's just a bit of context. Now, context is really important, so it's always good to analyze how context relates. But we're now going to focus on Eric, so the character of Eric. So feel free to, in the comments, describe Eric in a few words. Say everything you can about Eric. What would you describe Eric as? And what does Eric represent that demonstrates Priestley's intentions? So I'm going to start with the quote about Eric. Good sport. So this is Eric describing Eva Smith. He says she's a good sport. Now, this idea of sport in reference to a person exposes how a lot of the male characters mistreat Eva. They view her as merely a form of entertainment that they can easily get bored of. Now, the audience can recognize a corresponding fate to Eva when we're looking at the good sport. So when he's saying good sport is an entertainment that you can easily get bored of, we definitely see that just in the same way that males discard sports easily once they're bored of them, Eva Smith is discarded the same way. So how is this quote important in demonstrating Priestley's ideas? Priestley is outlining how the male character's treatment of female characters, and just in a wider way, male people's treatment towards female people's treatment is clearly, there's an underlying sense of unfairness and mistreatment. And the audience, the way Priestley convinces the audience of this injustice is by creating this character of Eva, who is a victim and is very convincing, and the audience would like her because she not only is she good looking and a victim, but she's also a young woman, and so it vouches for the audience's sympathy. So that's definitely one quote I would talk about, and how Priestley uses Eric to characterize male characters' mistreatment towards female characters and vouches for the audience's sympathy. So that's one point. Now, another point we could discuss about Eric, using more quotes, is the connotations of being an alcoholic. So Eric is normally associated with alcohol, definitely in this play, throughout the entirety of the play. So Sheila uses euphemism, which is just when you understate someone. So instead of saying, for example, someone is fat, you just say they're round. So it's a more gentler way of saying something. So Sheila's euphemism, instead of calling Eric an alcoholic, she calls him squiffy. And there's a very accusatory tone here. And what this suggests is that Eric, by outlining Eric early on in the play and associating him with alcohol, it foreshadows Eric's later abuse of alcohol and how he uses this abuse of alcohol to abuse Eva. Obviously, by unfortunately sexually assaulting her. Now, alcohol is one of the main things that Eric represents. He's squiffy. Now, what other quotes can we suggest about Eric being an alcoholic? If you can think of any, feel free to put them in the comments. But I'll also add some here. So not only squiffy, but he also says, I've had a few drinks. And then he also says, in the state where a chap turns nasty. So when he says the state, he is referring to when alcohol begins to corrupt him morally and through creating it, as in, instead of saying in the state where I turn nasty, he refers to himself in third person. And when referring to himself in third person, he not only separates him away from the blame that he should feel, but he also projects this onto the audience, how the state where a chap turns nasty is often common. And it's common for men to abuse women during the contemporary period. So here we can link this idea back to the question in which how was it important in demonstrating Priestley's idea? Abuse women. Apparently there's connection issues, so feel free to tell me if you can't hear me. Oh, and thank you for the contribution, Livia. He's been steadily drinking too much, Sheila, about Eric. I'm unsure if you can still hear me because something has just changed here. But yeah, just tell me if you can't. So yeah, good addition, Livia. That is very true. So I'll add that here. He's been steadily drinking too much. One second, there's a bit of issues going on. Okay. He's been steadily steadily. Okay. So how male characters treat female characters. And the good thing is, the second point about being an alcoholic also links to the fact that male characters mistreat female characters. So it will flow nicely because we can make nice points that will relate to both things. Now, the third point that I want to make is about Eric's immaturity. So, final point. So, Eric is a highly immature character. He is a very young character, which may explain why he's immature, but also what quotes suggest that Eric is immature. The first quote that I have that suggests Eric is in with her. Or anything. And then another quote that supports that he's quite immature is, "I got it from the office." So that's in reference to the fact that he stole from his father's office. What do both of these quotes suggest? About Eric's immaturity. So the fact that he says, "I wasn't in love with her or anything," but his actions clearly and also the fact that he said, "I got it from the office." So a sweet gesture. And it shows that he's caring. It also signifies immaturity because his means of retrieving the money is quite illogical and impulsive. So Eric's immaturity and how he's also very how it's back to the question. I keep asking there's connection issues. I do hope this is working. And highly impulsive. And but his immaturity is integral to the plot because it was necessary for him to steal from his father for the audience to 1 second. Hello, I hope the multiple issues. So as you were saying, how can we link Eric's immaturity to the question? So we were just discussing how the fact that Eric's immaturity was integral to the Anne in Spectacles plot, because if it wasn't for Eric being immature, then he would have never have stolen from Mr. Burling, and then we would have never have seen Mr. Burling and how greedy he was and how angry he was that Eric had stolen the money. So we would have never have seen really important characters and the lack of development in Mr. Burling. So how is it important? Without his immaturity, it would not have exposed Mr. Burling's greed. And several other characters' fatal flaws. Okay. So now we have how we would approach this character question. So a lot of the time when your teachers ask you to practice questions, a really helpful method is planning questions as well, because sometimes it's just the ideas that you're unable to get as opposed to whether you can flow and write them. So now we've done Eric, I'm going to move on to the theme question that was suggested. The theme questions tend to be of a wider and broader lens. So in this instance, we see the theme question is, how successfully is the idea of collective responsibility explored in the play? Now, collective responsibility is a massive, massive part of Priestley's entire play. And that's why it will always be quite slightly harder, slightly more difficult to talk about collective responsibility. However, I would suggest that if you're the type of person that always goes off topic, then do the theme question, because the theme question is really hard to go off topic because it's quite broad anyway. Let me just share this tab now. Okay. So let's really look at this question. Collective responsibility. Let's focus in on collective responsibility. So what does collective responsibility mean? This is probably a useful thing to talk about in your introduction. So in your introduction, I would definitely suggest the filtering down method. So if you don't have, then let me just tell you about a quick system. What it is it's like a funnel, and you start off by talking about the broad context, and then you discuss the play as a whole, and then you filter it down into the question. So whatever the question is asking, question and key moments. So what I mean by this, let's look at this question, for example. So collective responsibility. What is the broad context of collective responsibility? So let's plan the introduction. So what would the contemporary audience have viewed about collective responsibility? So the contemporary audience, which is just the 1945 audience, would have viewed collective responsibility as quite recent, like a recent notion they would be aware of because of the Labour government taking over. And because it's a recent notion, it would also be really important to them, and it will be the massive shift that was occurring at that time from the focus of the rich capitalists to the working class. So this of collective responsibility would have been very apparent to the contemporary 1945 audience. Apparent. But what does it mean to us as a modern audience? Well, that is up to you to decide. So you can choose where you want to go with this. What does it mean for us as a collective? What does collective responsibility mean for us as a modern audience now? You could say perhaps we are a bit out of touch with the notion. Responsibility is still not, so we're still not in touch with this idea yet. But as a modern audience, we have a lot of human rights that have changed since the contemporary audience's time, so we can argue both ways. So it's up to you. So in your introduction, definitely talk about what collective responsibility means, and then try and mention how it's referenced in the play as a whole. So how important is Priestley's inclusion of the theme? He suggests it's very important. Priestley suggests that collective responsibility is integral for a functioning society. If there's one thing that Priestley wants the audience to go away with, it's the idea that collective responsibility is integral and vital for a functioning society to work. And how does he represent this idea of collective responsibility? He exposes the negative drawbacks of no responsibility. So what Priestley does here is what we call proof by contradiction. This is actually a mathematical term, but it's very useful in this case because we definitely see that Priestley is proving by contradiction. He's showing how necessary responsibility and collective responsibility is by showcasing the audience a scenario in which barely any of the characters, definitely from the beginning, have no collective responsibility. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now we've discussed an introduction, we've delved into the topic. Now it's time to plan out an answer. So as we said, we always like to go for the 3-part answers. So now I would refrain from saying 3 paragraphs because you can use multiple paragraphs per point or per part if you want. So that's why I'm going to use part 1, collective responsibility. So we are asked, how successfully is the idea of collective responsibility? So not only the methods, but we have to comment on whether they were successful or whether they weren't successful. So let's try and see what methods did Priestley use to present collective responsibility. I would definitely say one method was through the sympathetic character of Eva. She was presented as a character who suffers at the hands of the bourgeoisie. If you don't know what bourgeoisie means, bourgeoisie is just the upper class, rich family lifestyle. So that's what bourgeoisie is. And the opposite of bourgeoisie is what we call proletariat. So this is what Eva represents. Eva represents the proletariat. These are really good words to use in your writing. Proletariat just means the working class, and the bourgeoisie just means the upper class. So one way in which Priestley successfully vouches for collective responsibility is through the sympathetic character of Eva. She suffers at the hands of the bourgeoisie. And how does she suffer? She suffers both physically, especially Eric and Gerald, and she suffers mentally, through Sheila. She suffers economically through Mr. and Mrs. Berling. So you could talk about the different ways in which Sheila suffers at the hands of the bourgeoisie, describes and defines that idea of the lack of collective responsibility. So here Priestley is saying that due to the lack of responsibility and due to the suffering, that is how collective responsibility is portrayed in the play. Now, another point we can say about collective responsibility is we could say each of the characters' refusal. So another way you could target this question, just as a bit of contrast for how successfully is the idea of collective responsibility explored, you could talk about in each paragraph different characters and how the different characters handle collective responsibility differently. So you can talk about the younger and older generation. So your second point could be about the younger versus older generation. So this displays collective responsibility. The sympathetic character of Eva, who suffers, displays what happens at the hands of no responsibility. And then another character group, or something that we can talk about in relation to collective responsibility, could possibly be the inspector. The purpose of the inspector. The inspector acts as that godlike voice who puts the flashlight on each of the characters and details the exposure and the truth. So the purpose of the inspector, he represents truth, and the purpose of his visit is to force responsibility upon those who just fail to simply accept it. He's basically representative of a reality check. He's giving them a reality check. So these 3 points are really useful. In terms of quotes, for the younger and older generation, we can discuss how the younger generation are more open, whereas the older generation are hugely dismissive. In one quote, Mrs. Burling says, I do not accept any responsibility at all. And then Mr. Burling also says, your mother had every right. Whereas the younger generation, they are much more accepting, much more open to the idea of, developing and maturity. So it's ironic how the younger generation show an increased level of maturity. That could definitely be one of your sub points that you can mention. How it's ironic that the older characters display less maturity than the younger generation. And you can also talk about how Sheila presents the glorified development in both maturity and socialistic views. And we can also see this increased maturity through Sheila and Eric when they begin in the play by calling their parents mama and things like that. And then they end by saying mother. So this development into more mature ways is just one of the ways in which their maturity and their development has been exhibited. And in terms of the purpose of the inspector, we see that in the stage directions, he's described as a massive character, or he has massive presence. And this idea of massive just illuminates this sense of purposefulness. He is also presented as quite vague, and the fact that the audience do not know much information about him forces the audience to just reflect on the Burlings as opposed to making the protagonist the inspector. I think it's really important to discuss the fact that Priestley didn't intentionally and didn't forcefully create the inspector as the protagonist, as the main character. Priestley enhanced the inspector's role by fulfilling him with purpose, but he did not make him a protagonist, because being a protagonist requires a lot of information about that character and a storyline about that character. However, that is definitely an underdeveloped part. We do not see a storyline with the inspector, so that's another interesting point to explore. So, this idea of collective responsibility, there's a lot to say. You can get overwhelmed. So, if you are going to get overwhelmed and with the amount to say, I would definitely recommend staying with the character. However, as I said before, if you're the type of person that will all unrelated, then maybe choose the theme question. It's up to you. We've looked at both of them now. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a whole nother question, and I'm going to set a 15-minute timer. And of course, I don't expect you to be finished, but I expect at least an introduction and a paragraph, and I will do the same on my end, and then we can check how well you've done. Okay, so we are now going to do this question. How does Priestley use Gerald Croft's status to show his ideas about society? Now, you can either answer that question, or you can answer, how successfully does Priestley present the different attitudes between the older and younger generations? It's ironic we just talked about that. So I'm going to set a 15-minute timer. Choose which question you want to do, find some quotes, make a quick plan, and then try and write your introduction and at least begin your first paragraph. Good luck. Okay. Hey everyone. Sorry to interrupt you if you were in the middle of left. So it's up to you whether you want to continue down that path or. Sorry, I don't know if there's some connection issues, but I was talking about a possible resource that I believe you might find helpful. So it's this Quizlet set with 56 sets, and it has things like paragraphs, really in-depth analysis. And I had used it when I was doing my GCSEs, and I got 4 marks on the Annan Spectacles question, and these are all about Annan Spectacles, so they might be helpful to you. I'm thinking of selling them. Feel free to comment if you're interested in buying them. They won't be majorly expensive, and yeah, they're quite good resources. I've compiled them from my own knowledge. That's a lot of what GCSE English wants. Steps using really high level of language, as well as talking about the analytic effects. So it's almost the end of the literature section, and then we're going to move on to GCSE maths. I think we might start a little bit early at 10:55, and then continue on to 12. So I'll give you to 10:55 to have a mini break, and then we'll start GCSE maths revision at 10. Hello everyone, I am back and we will be doing GCSE Maths revision now. So let me get rid of the literature screen. So I'm currently sharing with you a document which is called the Grade 9 to 1 Maths Hardest Grade 9 Tough Questions. So this is a non-calculator paper and I'll share you the link in the chat. And how this session is going to work is because with maths, everyone works at their own pace. And I would rather you try the questions before you just watch me walk through it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend the first half of the hour. I will be doing the questions and you can do the questions too on the link that I sent to you. Hopefully if that's there. That might be a better link. Oh no, that's the same link. And so yeah, we're going to spend the first half of an hour. I want you to do as many questions as you can, and I will do questions, and you will see it on the screen if you need help. And then for the second half, I want you to send me any questions that you're unsure with, and hopefully I can walk you through them. Okay. Do tell me if the link works. I will try it and see myself. If that link doesn't work, I don't actually think that is a link. Very apologies. But go on to that website, and if you go onto that website and click on the Grade 9 Tough Paper 1, if you click on the Grade 9 Paper 1 PDF, then you will be able to access it and then do as many questions as possible. So I'm going to check back up on you at 11:30. I'll leave the screen of me doing the questions up so you can see. And if you have any questions, just put it in the chat and hopefully I'll be able to see. Thank you so much and good luck. Hello, everyone. Just a reminder, since we're just above halfway through, that if anyone has any issues or questions, then feel free to just comment them, and at 11:30, I'll go through them with you. Hello everyone. I'm going to now go through some questions that some people find a bit difficult. So let me share this one. So this question is about cosine rule, and it's quite a few many steps to it. So let's get started in doing it. And also tell me as well. So triangle ABC is shown in the diagram. AC is x, so let's label the diagram here x. And BC is 3x. Angle ACB is 60 degrees. So we need to show that the perimeter of the triangle is 4 plus root 7x. So in order to show that the perimeter is this value, we need to find the side. We need to find the side AB. Now, this is not a right angle triangle, so the only way we can find side AB is using the cosine rule. And there are two formations of the cosine rule, but we'll be using the form that is for sides. So the cosine rule is a squared is equal to b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cos a. So these letters might look scary at first, so let's assign these letters. So a squared is the lowercase letters are the sides and the uppercase letters are the angles. So a squared is what we have here. So we want to find the side AB. So we make this the lowercase a, and it's always that the side opposite, the side and the angle are going to have the same letter. So this angle is opposite this side, so that's going to be capital A. And then you can just label B and C on either side, it doesn't matter. And then this is obviously going to be B, and this is going to be C. So now we've labeled the sides and the angles, we are going to substitute the values in the equation. Okay? So again, we don't know what a squared is because we're trying to find out what a is. B squared, so we've got b is x, so we're doing x squared. And then we're doing plus c squared. So c is 3x, so we're doing add 3x squared. And then we're minusing it from 2 times b, which is x, times 3x, times cos, and capital A is 60 degrees. So this is what we're working on. So a squared is equal to, x squared is just x squared. 3x squared will give you 9x squared. And in the brackets, we've got 2 times x times 3x, which will give you 6x squared. And you have to do and multiply this by cos 60. Now, since this is a non-calculator paper, you will have to use your memorized values to figure out what cos 60 is. So they require you to memorize certain values. So I don't know if you've revised the memorized values of what they are. If not, I have a quick trick of showing you how to revise them. So we have sin, cos, and tan. And we need to know the values for 0, 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees, and 90 degrees. So I will say it's 0, then half, then 1 over root 2, then root 3 over 2, and then 1. And all you have to do is memorize that line because then cos is that reversed. So 1, it will be here, and then it will be root 3 over 2, and then it'll be 1 over root 2, and then it will be 1 over 2, and then it'll be 0. And then I would write tan, but we don't need it in this question. So what we're looking for is cos 60, and cos 60 is half. So now we can put half into the equation and replace cos 60 with half. So we've got a squared is equal to x squared plus 9x squared, which is 10x squared, minus 6x squared times by cos 60, which we now know is half. So a squared is now 10x squared minus 6x squared times half will give you 3x squared because you're just halving the value. Yeah, that's correct. Sorry, I was just replying to your message. Yeah, that's correct. And now what you do is a squared is 10x squared minus 3x squared, which is 7x squared. So now you know that a is the value root 7x. And remember that x is outside of the third because you've already square rooted x. Hopefully you get it up until there. Please tell me if you don't. And then, so now we have the length of x. Oh, sorry, now we have the length of AB. So we know that length AB is equal to root 7x. So now, to find the perimeter, you're just going to add this length to the other two lengths, which are plus x plus 3x. So you'll do root 7x plus 3x plus x to get the perimeter. And then the perimeter will then be root 7x plus 4x. And you can then factorize this down into root 7 plus 4 and x on the outside. And that is the answer. Do tell me if you understand, or if you still don't, then I'm willing to explain any part again. Yeah, I agree with that, Livia. That mistake is very common. That's why you always have to make sure you're squaring it. But perfect. Okay. If anyone else has any questions that they are stuck on, feel free to tell me. If not, I'll just suggest you keep going through the questions for grade 9. Hey everyone, just an update really. So, if you would like to do some vectors practice, then I'm showing you a vectors question here. Vectors are really hard questions and they tend to be worth 5 to 6 marks. And I think the best way to get used to them is to do practice questions. I would definitely recommend another YouTuber, I can't remember the name, but they did the top 5 hardest vector questions. They're really good to go through. Here's a good one. I think it's a good, nice, challenging question to end our sessions for today. Well done for to everyone who's been keeping update and productive this far. I wonder, you feel free to tell me if this has been helpful, or if you prefer to study by yourself, or if you would like me to do more explaining or leave you to do more of your own practice. It's up to you. Just give me some feedback because we have 2 weeks of this and I'll be planning on doing this every single day. I'm going to do the vectors question and feel free to have a go as well. Hello, everyone. We're approaching the end of today's sessions. I hope you found it helpful. I know some people did. I'm really grateful for you guys for watching. You can see I was struggling a bit with the vectors questions, but I'll get back to it. And again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this helpful. I know exams are approaching and it is stressful and it's so easy to procrastinate during the Easter. I definitely did. So I just want to help you keep you guys accountable. That's the end of today's live streams. Remember, live streams start from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. if you're an early bird and want to do the sciences, and then 9 to 12 for English language, literature, and maths. And then after that, you're free for the day because you've done your revision. So, again, thank you so much for watching, and I'm very grateful that you've been here, and see you tomorrow if you want to come.